Why doesn't God intervene more? It's a fair question, and there will be some answers.
Welcome to Thinking About God with Dr. Barry Whitney. In this series, Dr. Whitney explores the formidable challenge of reconciling belief in God with the evil, injustice, and suffering in the world. What can be learned from theological study on this problem? What can be learned from faith? Separating good and bad answers by sound theological and biblical study and reflection has been central in Dr. Whitney's attempt to justify belief in God despite the world's evil and suffering.
I think this is where Davis irritates people in the book when he says, hey, I don't know. I don't know why God doesn't intervene. So you get the three critics saying, Davis's problem is I don't know defense. That's unfair, but he does say I don't know quite a few times. He's humble. We don't know. But John Hick's going to give you some reasons, and Griffin's going to give you some reasons. So it's not like we don't have reasons. And when we get to the Boyd book, he's got a chapter that's titled Prayer. Why doesn't God intervene when we ask God to? And he has 9 reasons. It's not like some formula, but there are certain obvious reasons why God doesn't intervene. Like I say, this is not the occult where you can call on the powers of the universe and say the right magical formula and the universe will obey. This is Christianity with a personal God that's powerful and loving and just, and you can't mess with him and bully him around. He does what is right. It's not the occult. It's not some impersonal force like a New Age believes in. But there are reasons God allows evil to exist. So that's the free will defense. You have to justify there is free will. You have to justify that it's worth it. And you have to answer the question better than Davis does. That's why we've got to read on here. I don't know. You have to answer the question why God doesn't intervene more. Here's what he does say, though. He does say things like, and I've written these down for you, suffering can lead to spiritual growth. Believe me, if you get through some miserable suffering, you're a spiritual person if you kept your faith in God than the person beside you. And life's not about gathering material possessions. It's about building our soul. It's about the Jewish Christian understanding of reality. It's about becoming more godlike, more spiritually deep. It's not about enjoyment. It's about being good. It's about being spiritually good. And we can do that. Let's say 2 people go blind tonight by some freak accident. One person curses God and his life just goes down the tubes, miserable the whole rest of his life. And the other person, eventually after cursing God, because we always seem to do that for some reason, because we know God could have prevented it, God has the power to do it, this person eventually accepts it, realizes that life is finite, that he's grown spiritually from it. You can see that it's not guaranteed that people are going to use suffering for a good. Some people, it destroys their lives, understandably. But that's not what God is after. God is not giving us the suffering, but he's giving us a means to cope with it. And lo and behold, you become spiritually more deep. That's what life's about. It's about becoming good and spiritual, not about happiness. The happiness is a byproduct of being good. It's not an end in itself. Aristotle tells you the same thing, by the way. He calls it happiness, but he means it's not feeling happy, it's being good. This culture says the whole point of life, because it's all meaningless, is to feel good, to feel happy, to have all these good feelings. That's not being good. John Hick has a great line. I want my children not to be happy all the time, but to become good. I used to put that on my fridge. There's wisdom in it. It's not about getting everything you want every time you blink an eye. Daddy, I need this, I need that, I need that. It's becoming good. Then all the stuff becomes meaningless. And because you're good, you have a different kind of happiness that's far beyond. So that's one good reason. Davis hints at that. We're not worrying so much about Davis, although we have to put names to this or else it's all just going to become one big blur. But one reason God doesn't intervene is that God is allowing us to grow spiritually. That's a legitimate answer, I think. I warn you, though, there is no one answer that covers all cases of suffering. That's a big mistake. See, if you say, now I get it, I've solved it, I need no more. Every time I suffer, it's because God wants me to grow spiritually. That doesn't work. Some suffering is not meant for you to grow spiritually. It's more complicated than that. But this is one major piece of the puzzle. Some suffering can lead to spiritual growth. And we should look at it that way and tell ourselves, instead of cursing God or disbelieving in God, which is the ultimate insult to somebody who gave us the free will and creation in the first place, we should just be patient and realize that you're growing spiritually through some suffering. There's other reasons for other suffering. This may be the big one, though. Life's about spiritual growth, and Davis also reminds you, and here's part of his answer why God doesn't intervene all the time against all suffering. You need to know this. This is a fair question. What, according to Davis, who believes that God doesn't intervene much, which of the following are reasons God doesn't intervene? I want you to know it that well. This is like 500 pages crammed into 10 here. It's packed full of information. But these are important questions and important answers for all of us at some stage in our life. Why doesn't God intervene? Number one, maybe God is allowing us spiritual growth. Number two, you could say, God is suffering with us. God suffers with us, so it must be worth it somehow. God cares. God's involved in our suffering. I know that's a heresy for traditional theology. They say God can't suffer. God can't have feelings. Well, for Christians, the advice is read the Bible. God weeps. God gets angry. God actually has a personality, according to Christians and Jews, and God does suffer with us. Around the 1920s, that became a major theme in theology. It was ridiculed by traditional theologians, but I think there's a truth in it. Christians believe that Jesus represents God. Jesus suffered. So hence God suffers. That's the easy Christian answer. It wouldn't be the Muslim or the Jewish answer, but Davis as a Christian can use that. God allows suffering, doesn't intervene, but suffers with us. We're sharing in the sufferings of God. We're becoming more God-like by sharing in God's suffering. It's not the complete solution. It's vicarious suffering. Suffering for others. There's some merit in some of this stuff for some sufferings. There's another one. Davis reminds us, God doesn't intervene every time we suffer. Remember, this is a short life. There is such a thing as final redemption. There is a heaven at the end of it all. There's more to life than this miserable vale of tears. We have to put things in perspective. And he also says that God can't continually intervene or intervene too much because that would disrupt our freedom and it would disrupt natural laws. I think all of those are legitimate. Think about it. God could take away every case of AIDS, every case of cancer. God could take away every known disease. John Hick has an answer to that in chapter 2. If God took away every known disease, just imagine this. Make a little diagram and say, this black side is all the bad stuff in life. Every known disease, all of them. And this side is all the good in life. Now let's just imagine, thought experiment here. God takes away all known disease. Look what's left and watch what happens to what's left. What's left quickly becomes this is good and this is lesser good. In other words, what's left is all relative. What's left is not just good. What's left if God took away every known disease? It doesn't take much of an imagination to think about what we would be complaining about next. And not just trivial things like hangnails or I'm not always in a state of ecstasy, but there are always things. It's all relative. The balance between good and evil in this life, the good would actually be good and lesser good, evil. We'd always complain. Think of your life. You know that's true. You're never at a state, no matter how good it is, where there isn't some aggravation in it. There's no such thing as all good. It doesn't make any sense. Free creatures are dangerous things. One evil thought and you've got some evil. There are some good things. People are afraid of the free will defense because they're afraid that philosophy has denied free will or science. I think this is what the Christian answer approaches. This is just saying, what are the questions? If free will, you hear these sound bites. If you ever call some religious talk show, why does God allow evil? Well, because God gave us free will. That's it, sound bite. This is the answer. But what I'm trying to do here, right, I'm trying to make the answer a little more valuable. You can't just say, because God gave us free will. The legitimate questions are, well, is there free will? Is it worth it? Why doesn't God intervene more? What is God doing if God doesn't intervene more? What possible reason could there be? Well, spiritual growth, learning how to be patient, learning how to trust God when times are bad. That's all these things God wants. It's easy to trust God, as Job found, remember, when things were going well. But the book of Job is all about, what do you do when things don't go well? Do you still trust God? That was Satan's challenge to God. You take away all the blessings and let's see what He's really like when things go badly. Let's see if you trust God. Let's see if your faith really was faith in the first place. This is why when people lose their faith when some tragedy happens, my first reaction is, that's the beauty of building your soul and your spiritual nature, is that it can withstand all of this stuff. It doesn't destroy us. We get angry. That's legitimate. We get depressed. That's legitimate. But we don't stay there because we have a faith in God like Job that can withstand that stuff. I'm sorry this is taking so long, but I want you to get this free will defense down. Okay, now here are the problems with it. John Hicks says, Davis talks about Adam as the reason that there's sin in the world, and Satan as Adam causes our moral evil, Satan causes the physical evil. Now, Davis is enough of a traditional Christian where he talks about Adam and Eve and Satan. I have no problem with that personally. I think it's a sham the way the liberals have just ignored all of that stuff. But John Hick, who's a liberal, that's one of his criticisms. How can you talk about Adam and Eve and Satan? They're just symbols, aren't they? And I'm sorry to say about 75% of this culture thinks, including Catholics, don't believe that Satan is real. Well, maybe the Pentecostals are showing them with their 90% belief in Satan that they might be missing something. To ridicule Davis for saying Adam and Eve were the cause of suffering and Satan is the cause of natural evil, we don't think in those terms these days, but we're missing some essential Christian beliefs and all kinds of things, but that needn't deter us. That's another class, another place and time. All Hick can say besides ridiculing Adam and Eve is to say, if God can intervene more, Dr. Davis, why doesn't God? Well, coming from Hick who thinks that God never intervenes, it's an odd question. Griffin, his line is the same thing. His second criticism is, if God's power is self-limited, that means God has power in reserve, can do anything, why doesn't He then? Same question. See, that's what the free will defense has to put up with. If you believe that God has given us free will, it's worth the risk, it leads to a lot of good, probably a majority of good every time we use it, why doesn't God intervene against our misuse of free will? That's a fair question. But I think already we can see there actually are some answers without claiming to know everything. Maybe it's for spiritual growth. Maybe God doesn't want to upset your free will and other people's free will. Maybe God doesn't want to upset natural laws by God for reasons. They support human life. If God wants to take down some mafia leader in a plane and you happen to be on the plane and God violates the law of gravity, it's not a good place to be. There are reasons God doesn't intervene against natural laws. The atheists make it sound like it's God's duty to intervene against all suffering. Well, says who? God has reasons. If you believe in God, by the way, you know God has reasons. We just don't know what they are in detail. It may be spiritual growth. It may be not messing with free will too much. It may not be messing with natural law too much. There are reasons. It's not a question that means that we don't believe in God anymore. Here's one that Davis doesn't answer, but let me try to answer it. Jesus, for one, used His free will always for good. If Jesus always used His free will for good, according to Davis, why don't more people use it always for good? I can't tell you how silly a question that is. Jesus, for a Christian, is God in the flesh, unique. That's why the rest of us don't use our free will for good. You're not God in the flesh, despite the New Age belief. I'm not God in the flesh. I'm corrupted. I'm a rebel. I'm fallen. This is very odd. Saying if God could act in Jesus and Jesus act on His own and they come up with good acts all the time, why can't God act in you and let you act freely and come up with good acts all the time? Simple answer is you're not God. Roth's criticism of the free will defense, it's the same one that the other two said. God should intervene more. Free will's, okay, let's say it's a blessing, it's a good, but God should intervene more. He also says Davis is too optimistic, thinking that it's all going to be redeemed in the end. It'll never be redeemed. This suffering, says Roth, can never be redeemed. You know what Davis did in his response to the criticisms? He said, you know, a lot of Holocaust victims said it can be redeemed. These were people in Auschwitz, and they were asked the question, do you think that your suffering is redeemed now that you're free and like it's over? And of course it is. That's the Christian promise, that this is going to feel like just a bad dream at best. It's not like we're going to go through eternity moaning and groaning. If you've had some horrible suffering in your own lifetime, my guess is you're not carrying it around now saying, man, when I was 8 and I had that toothache, and I curse God for that. Mind you, my life is great now. I married a dentist and I'm a millionaire and I'm just living a life of ease. But I really hate that God for doing that. I had that toothache for a whole week. Let it go, right? And we do. We let it go. Suffering becomes a distant memory. It can be redeemed. It can be forgotten. That doesn't mean it wasn't really suffering. When Ross says this suffering can never be made right, of course it can. Live a few years in eternity and trust me, it'll be made right. If Jews and Muslims and Christians are right that there's an afterlife of bliss with God, of course it's going to be made right. You're not going to be moaning and groaning about something that happened when you're 8 years old or whatever. Davis has rejoined us all his criticisms. I better get on with the other two, though.
Please join us for more episodes of Dr. Whitney's God and Evil series and other series that will be available on this channel. Dr. Whitney is an acknowledged international authority on the problem of evil, for which he has published dozens of important works. These include his book, Theodicy, The Problem of God and Evil, the only definitive annotated bibliography on the problem of evil, as well as his popular book, What Are They Saying About God and Evil, and dozens of other books, book chapters, journal articles, and book reviews. He has also published articles in the New Catholic Encyclopedia and in the forthcoming New Westminster Dictionary of Christian Theology. For more information and resources, please visit Dr. Whitney's website at drbarrywhitney.com and his Facebook page, Thinking About God with Dr. Barry Whitney. The God and Evil series was recorded in Dr. Whitney's university course on God and Evil. The lectures have been edited for a wider audience and enhanced by music composed by Dr. Whitney specifically for this series. This God and Evil series is the property of Dr. Whitney, 2016.